Good morning. Welcome to the next presentation of the Earthquake Country Alliance Safer at Home webinar series. Today's topic is step 4 of the seven steps, and it is minimize financial hardship. My name is Janet Ruiz. I'm the Director of Strategic Communication at the Insurance Information Institute. I'm also the Media Bureau Coordinator for the Earthquake Country Alliance in the San Francisco Bay Area. The Earthquake Country Alliance is a partnership of many public, private, and grassroots leaders in organizations and communities across California. Everyone can join our mailing list to get updates about future webinars and activities at earthquakecountry.org/alliance. It's a great website and we encourage you to participate. Our webinar series is following the ECA, Earthquake Country Alliance, 7 Steps to Earthquake Safety. Simple actions to improve safety before, during, and after earthquakes. You can learn all about the steps at earthquakecountry.org/7 steps and in Spanish at terremotos.org/siete pasos. Here's the planned schedule for other webinars in our Safer at Home series. The goal is to provide information that you and your family can use to be safer at home and for you to be a resource in your community following a major earthquake. Visit earthquakecountry.org/safer at home or join our mailing list at earthquakecountry.org/alliance to be notified when registration is open for each webinar. Again, my name is Janet Ruiz. I'm the Director of Strategic Communication with the Insurance Information Institute, III, and I work with the Earthquake Country Alliance Bay Area as well as statewide. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on the ECA website next week. In order to ask questions of presenters, please use the Q&A feature. Just click on Q&A at the bottom of your screen and type your question. We have a fantastic set of presenters today from across California. Today's webinar is going to cover various aspects of financial preparedness, including how to reduce the cost to repair or rebuild homes and buildings by retrofitting or purchasing insurance. Our first presenter today is Dante Randazzo. He is with FEMA. He is the Federal Preparedness Coordinator of FEMA Region 9, which covers California, Nevada, Arizona, Hawaii, and Pacific territories.
And I'm Mark Benthey, and I'm with the Earthquake Country Alliance. I will turn my camera on too. Hello. So I'll keep an eye if Dante returns. So some personal financial preparedness tips. So first thing, it's important to know what the hazards are in your community that you will need to be prepared for, because there may be different aspects of how you prepare based on different hazards, including for your financial preparedness. And there are some great resources for knowing your hazards are the ready.gov website or the FEMA app. And in California, you can also look at the myhazards.caloes.ca.gov website. You can just search for My Hazards, and it should come up, one word, My Hazards, and we'll put that in the chat as well. And then you want to make a plan. And it's really basic. You want to gather your financial and critical personal, household, and medical information and store it in a safe place. You may want to have copies of that and take that with you in your go bag as well. You want to consider having saving money in an emergency savings account for what you will need after an emergency. You may also want to have a small amount of cash at home in a safe place or to take with you in your go bag. And that really is a good idea to have that as like single, like ones and fives, not have that as large bills, because people may not be able to give you change. Dante, I see you're back. I've just been kind of going through this first slide. I haven't talked about the last option if you want to take over. But we're not hearing you. I can, there you go.
Thank you, Mark, and my apologies. I've had some technical difficulties this morning. My computer's frozen up on me a couple of times. So thank you for carrying forward.
Sure.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Dante Rendazzo, and I'm the Federal Preparedness Coordinator for FEMA Region 9. So just to carry through from Make a Plan, just to talk about, making sure you have the right insurance, as I'm sure Mark mentioned, knowing your hazards is so important. Is your home in a flood zone? Do you have low or moderate flood risk? If you do, you're 5 times more likely to experience a flood than a fire in your home in the next 30 years. And most homeowners insurance policies don't cover flooding. So in the event of a major flood event, you could be out, a substantial amount of money, more than the few $100 a year it would take to have a flood insurance policy. But that requires you to understand your risk. And so knowing what your hazards are will help you figure out what kind of insurance you need to get. As I mentioned, a lot of homeowners insurance policies will cover fire and wind events, but you want to be sure. You want to review your policy, find out what you're covered for and what you're not, and make sure that what you're covered for aligns with the potential hazards you can experience in your community or in your neighborhood. Even if it's not a very high probability event, earthquakes don't happen that often, but when they do, they can really be catastrophic. So you want to make sure that you're covered for that. A lot of homeowners insurance policies won't cover earthquake insurance and won't cover flood insurance. Those are things that you have to buy separately. So you want to check your insurance policy and make sure you're covered. And if you don't have what you need for earthquake or for flood, you may want to consider getting that insurance policy as well. If you don't take anything else away from my presentation, and I'll address this for this emergency financial first aid kit, documentation is so important. Whether you're working with FEMA or with a bank or another financial institution or an insurance company, you're going to need documentation, and you're going to need to be able to access that documentation. So, you're going to want to be able to access it if the power goes out. You're going to want to be able to access it if you have to evacuate your home and do it in a hurry, as in the case of a wildfire. You're going to want to be able to access that documentation, even if your home is damaged or destroyed by a flood or an earthquake or a fire. So, keeping your documentation in a safe place, being able to retrieve that information remotely, or to grab it and take it with you, have it all in one place, is going to be really important. If you have to bring it with you, you may only have a few minutes to leave your home. You don't want to be spending that time sorting through your filing cabinet. So your medical records, your insurance information, financial information, identifying information like your social security card, you're going to want to make sure you can access all of that, because if you're recovering from a disaster and going through the disaster recovery process, you're going to be working with financial institutions, insurance companies, including medical insurance companies, potentially, and the federal government, including FEMA. They're all going to need that documentation in order to be able to help you. And if you don't have that at the ready, it's going to mean that it's going to take longer and be more difficult to get the support and the assistance you may need following a disaster. So if you take nothing else away from this presentation today, please make sure that you're able to access your information after disaster, and then you can have it at the ready, because you're going to need it. The tool that we have here, the Emergency Financial First Aid Kit, is a great resource for that. You can put all of your information in one place. It walks you through how to do that. It has a checklist for all the information you might need following a disaster. It's really a one-stop shop. So if you take a look at this Emergency Financial First Aid Kit, it'll walk you through what you need, and you can put it all in one place. It also has tips on safe storage, whether that's keeping it in a safe, or keeping it password protected in the cloud. Again, you may want to have multiple ways of accessing your information depending upon the hazards most likely to affect your communities. Last thing I'll mention is that the FEMA app, which I highly recommend you download, you can have it set regular reminders to update your emergency financial first aid kit. You're going to want to do that occasionally, especially as there's major life events. For example, if you have any new additions to the family, you want to make sure you have their records at the ready too. So you can have the FEMA app set a reminder for every year or so. So, every year when you're changing the batteries in your smoke alarms and doing other basic, maintenance work for keeping your home and family prepared, you may as well take a look at your emergency financial first aid kit as well and make sure everything you have is current and accessible. So again, those are the main things I wanted to cover. Make sure you have hazard appropriate insurance. Be prepared for a rainy day. I acknowledge, especially right now, it's difficult to set money aside, but it can be so helpful and so important if you do. At the very least, you should consider what your expenses might be, like paying an insurance deductible or replacing a water heater, and how you go about covering those expenses in the event of a disaster. And then, having your documentation at the ready, also important. So that's all I'll share today. Apologies for the technical issues, but happy to answer any questions any of you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dante. Before we continue, we'll pause for questions for Q&A. Sharon?
Hi, good morning. We have a question from Ada. Can we order multiple copies of the FEMA first aid kit for folks in our mobile home park who do not have access to the internet?
Thank you. I have to check on that. I don't know if we keep the emergency financial first aid kit. I don't know if we keep physical copies in our warehouse for ordering. If we do, it should be possible to order them that way. If not, it may just entail downloading it online and then printing out copies. But I can follow up on that and find out if that's a resource that we keep in the warehouse for ordering.
Great, thank you. We have another question from Robin. FEMA gives up to $2,500 in cash for immediate needs like burial and medical costs. National Disaster Assistance gives other aid. She's asking, does National Disaster Assistance give other aid?
They do. So in addition to the two things that she mentioned, I would say probably the biggest thing, the biggest item for individual assistance is typically housing assistance. So that's probably like the biggest category. There is, some additional disaster expenses like those that she mentioned, but I'd say probably the number one item is definitely housing assistance.
Great, thank you very much.
Thanks for those great questions. Our next speaker is Janelle Maffei. She is the Chief Mitigation Officer with the California Earthquake Authority. She will present a unique program offered in California. Janelle?
Thank you, Janet. So mitigation is in my title, and mitigation is a big word that a lot of people confuse with something legal. They think of litigation, but mitigation is really the reduction of the negative impacts of something on you or your family or your house or your possessions. So very, very carefully selected the title for today's presentation to Protecting Older Houses and Earthquakes. Protecting is what we're doing when we're mitigating, and it typically involves new construction, putting elements in that don't exist in an older house. I also selected older because in California, older would be pre-1980 because there were significant changes made to the building code. Unfortunately, in some parts of the United States that are prone to earthquakes, older can include frankly, new construction because they don't have state model building codes. And then houses. Houses is because we're doing the work on structure, but we really could put the word home in there because home is what we're talking about. We're talking about probably the biggest investment in a homeowner's life will be their investment in that home. And then of course, it's where you and your family sleep. And so home includes mobile homes. We just heard a question about mobile homes. So you can keep that in mind as we're going through the presentation. So the first slide starts with, what is earthquake risk? An earthquake risk is a combination of hazard plus vulnerability plus exposure. And I'll go through all three of those. But for one homeowner who has one house, that exposure is pretty simple. That is your house. For those of us that are looking at, let's say in our case, the state of California, I'm looking at all the houses in California. And then of course, FEMA and other national organizations are looking at the risk to even larger population. But if you move to the next slide, it'll show you very clearly that when we talk about hazard, it's all about location, 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 which is a term that you hear often in the real estate industry. The idea is, where is that home relative to earthquake faults? So let's say that a fault ruptures and creates an earthquake. So the magnitude is important because that's an indication of how long that fault rupture is, how big the area will be that's impacted. The distance between that fault rupture and your house is very important. The type of soil and rock between you and that fault rupture during that earthquake, and then of course the type of soil that you're on. And so all of these things all wrap into the kind of ground motions that your home or house will be subjected to in an earthquake. Now the next slide will show you that in California, you live in earthquake country. I think it's 85% of the population lives along that San Andreas fault zone, along the coast. And then of course, there's some pieces that turn in there and go up through the Mono Lakes region. So basically, if you do have a home or live in California, you should think of yourself as living in earthquake country. The idea here is to just embrace that, and then we'll show you some solutions. Next slide, please. So hazard. So we can create these very, very detailed maps. The dark, bright colors, the pinks and the reds will show you where you have the greatest shaking potential. And as I mentioned, those are the areas of highest population or along those lines. And these are the kinds of maps that we use as I am a structural engineer for both design and for retrofit of existing buildings. The next slide. But what house do you think you need to retrofit? That's a very, very important question. And that comes around to the vulnerabilities. And there are some very well-known vulnerabilities in housing construction. It includes the year of construction, because that relates to the building code that it was designed to. The number of stories, the taller, the more weight higher up is going to produce more damage. Type of construction, unreinforced masonry, adobe are way over in the dangerous column. Our wood frame is a little bit better in terms of performance. The type of foundation, slab on grade, do you have a crawl space, heavy materials on it, and then whether or not an older home has been retrofitted. So if you move to the next slide, I'll talk about some vulnerabilities. And I use the word older in my title because, as I mentioned, pre-1980 is considered older in the state of California. Pre-1940 is particularly vulnerable. So as I mentioned, huge parts of the population in that San Andreas fault zone. And if you, I think I click, there's an animation here, Mark, I believe, will show you that, the two areas, Los Angeles and Alameda County, have the highest concentrations of these pre-1940 buildings. So much of our construction going on around the world wars in areas with ports. So lots of vulnerable homes in areas of very high hazard. Next slide, please. So when I talk about vulnerabilities, here's just 4 of them. I'll start bottom right because it's the easiest one. Unreinforced masonry chimney. They have a tendency to not only fall off of the building or onto the house, but rather they can actually increase the damage to the house. And the recommendation nowadays is really to remove and replace. The top left is a crawl space. It's typically surrounded by short walls called cripple walls. Living space over garage is when you take a house and you introduce that tuck under parking, and you have just tiny piers either side of the garage door that can't resist earthquake forces. And then of course, hillside homes, any vulnerability on a hillside can be more dangerous. This is a particular picture of a pole supported house in Northridge, very dangerous. Next slide, please. Focusing on that crawl space house, because we estimate there are over 1 million of these houses in areas of high hazard, you can see that you'll know that you have a crawl space if you haven't poked your head under there. You have several steps up to that first floor, and you'll see crawl space fence, and then there will also be an access panel. And if you move to the next slide, we'll see a picture. And this is the kind of damage that we saw to these crawl space houses, these older houses, in the 2014 excuse me. Magnitude 6 Napa earthquake. And those short little stud walls, you can see them on the right-hand side there, have toppled. The next slide will show you another house that came off its foundation, severing the gas line. They were very fortunate that there wasn't a fire here because you can see the porch on the left blocked egress from that house. And the next slide. And of course, you know, beautiful Victorian, someone's been restoring this house on the left. The pink one was leaning when I took this picture and actually came down off of its foundation later in the day, was told about $300,000 just to shore that house and put it back on its foundation. Next slide, please. But what can you do about it? So this is where I say we can provide solutions. For a median price in California of $5,100, the work is all done under the house in the crawl space. You're putting plywood on those short stud walls. You're putting anchor bolts or these foundation plates that come in from the side and then clips at the top. Takes about 2 days for a contractor, an experienced contractor to do this work, a little longer for the talented do-it-yourselfer, but well within our grasp, and significantly reduces the likelihood of that sliding or toppling off of the foundation. Next slide, please. Exposure, as I mentioned, if you have one house, that is your exposure. Of course, if you have multiple properties, it gets bigger. And then those of us who are looking out for our communities, of course, are looking at this tremendous exposure throughout the state of California and the nation. Next slide. So California Earthquake Authority teamed up with Cal OES, and we have the Earthquake Brace and Bolt program. Now, registration is not currently open, but I do want to let you know about this because if you haven't retrofitted your house, you have this crawl space house, we provide a grant of up to $3,000 for that brace and bolt, that median $5,100 retrofit. We are closing in on 12,000 retrofits throughout the state. Very excited. Now, registration is not open, but you can give us your email. We'll let you know when registration opens. We also have information for you so you don't have to wait. You can go in and you can look at what you need to do. Next slide. So that is a little brief snippet of what vulnerabilities are, what some common vulnerabilities are to houses, particularly in California in earthquake country. And I'm happy to answer any questions now.
Thanks, Janelle. That was so interesting. Sharon, are there any questions?
Yes, thank you. A question from Ellis. We live in a large complex of townhomes. There are 5 townhomes in our building. Is there an effective way to reinforce each townhouse?
So yes. So first and foremost is likely you will need a structural engineer to identify what your vulnerabilities are. If it's an older house and it's a slab on grade, you may not have any significant vulnerabilities or none that are really cost effective to retrofit. If you have any kind of attached garages or you have the crawl space underneath, and that it could be a very similar retrofit to what I just described, just obviously on a little bigger scale.
Thank you. A question from Ada. Could a mobile home be eligible for the Brace and Bolt program?
You know, mobile homes are currently not eligible for the program, and I do apologize for that. But it's a similar idea here, is that the mobile home can topple off of its foundation, and there is a very well-known retrofit for it. Currently, we are only doing this wood frame, single family, up to 4 units, crawl space retrofit with the Earthquake Brace and Bolt program.
A question from Dennis. Is there financial assistance under the Brace and Bolt program for HOAs?
So currently, we require for the house to qualify that it be owner occupied. So if you have, for example, and it's up to 4 units. So if there's an owner living in one of 4 units in a kind of a communal living environment, then it still qualifies for Brace and Bolt. But keep checking back because we're looking to modify the program as we go on and expand it when we can.
How do manufactured or mobile homes do in an earthquake? What do you recommend for earthquake safety?
Well, manufactured homes that are not properly anchored to their foundation, unfortunately, do very poorly. And it is heartbreaking to drive through a community when you know it's a vulnerability and to continually see mobile homes and manufactured homes come off of their foundation. So a mobile or manufactured home owner needs to do their homework and go online and look at what's available to them. There are very well-known retrofits. Don't stop. Make sure that you put it on a decent foundation. Don't just put it on a piece of plywood under that house, because we know that those retrofits, when properly done, do work and protect those homes.
Suzanne asked how to register for the Earthquake Brace and Bolt program.
Right. So earthquakebracebolt.com, and when you go on, it has a button for giving us your information, and then we will email you when we come back with our registration.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for those great questions. Our next speaker is Glenn Pomeroy, Chief Executive Officer with the California Earthquake Authority. Glenn, thanks for joining us today.
Well, good morning. My pleasure. Good morning, everyone, wherever you are. The California Earthquake Authority is a not-for-profit earthquake insurance company created by the state of California after the Northridge earthquake basically chased most of the for-profit insurance companies out of the state in terms of offering earthquake insurance. So the state created this thing. We're not a state agency. We're a non-profit insurance company, basically. And our mission is to make earthquake insurance just as affordable and available as possible. Quick side note, I was on a call yesterday with colleagues from around the world who run similar programs that deal with providing coverage for natural catastrophe, volcanoes and floods and earthquakes all over the world. And the interesting thing to me was 14, 15 countries on this call, everyone was broadcasting from their home, from their bedrooms or kitchens or dining room tables, just like we are. And it drove home to me the fact that this is a global pandemic and we're all working our way through it. And as our world waits for a vaccine, I think it's actually relevant to think about that in terms of this mitigation discussion. Because really, getting vaccinated is mitigating against the probability of getting, in this case, COVID. But this program that Janelle has developed, these retrofits that she's engineered, really a way of vaccinating the home, taking steps proactively to make sure that the home isn't going to get terribly sick when the earthquake strikes. So at the California Earthquake Authority, we're making a big push this year on trying to get the word out that if you live in an older home, you ought to get it retrofitted, whether you qualify for one of the grants that we're able to put together every year. Funding's limited, so there's only a couple thousand usually per year that we're able to award by way of grants. But anyone who lives in an older home ought to consider getting their home retrofitted, whether they have a grant or not. If you go to the next slide, the point I want to make here is if you have a CEA insurance policy or you're thinking about getting one and you live in an older home, you get it retrofitted, you can take 25%, up to 25% of the cost of the insurance policy off. You get a 25% discount if you live in an older home and get it properly retrofitted. So that's a pretty big deal. The CEA, which has worked hard to lower our rates since we've been established, there's only so far we can go because we're required by law to charge rates that are adequate to make sure that we have enough money to pay the claims of our 1.1 million policyholders that we insure. But we have discovered through Janelle's leadership that if we retrofit a home, you reduce its risk so much that we can lower the cost of that insurance policy. And so this 25% discount that we rolled out a couple of years ago, we're pretty excited about, and we're going to try to bring more attention to it because it can really help. Next slide, please. So Janelle is our expert in terms of housing construction and retrofitting it. This chart just gives a sort of high-level description of the kind of home that qualifies for what kind of retrofit, or sorry, what kind of discount. In order to get that 25% discount, the home needs to be built in 1939 or earlier and meet some of these other qualifications. Must be on a wood construction and some of these other things. If the home is built from 1940 to 1979, there's only a 20% discount, and that's because the rates for those homes are less. Because the older the home is, the higher the rates are, because the more vulnerable the home is. So 1940 and 1979 home already has a bit of a discount already built into it, essentially. That's why that discount isn't as great. The big discount, the big ticket item, is for a pre-1939 home that's really a disaster waiting to happen. We got to get those homes retrofitted. Next slide, please. And so I just want to briefly walk through how to see how much a retrofit could benefit any of you. If you're considering or if you have a CA earthquake insurance policy, just go to our website, earthquakeauthority.com, and there with a couple of clicks, you'll get into this calculator and you can see for yourself what would happen to your premium if you take those steps to get it retrofitted. Just click on that button on the upper right. It's a little fuzzy, but it says free estimate. You click on that button and that'll take us to the next slide, which is a place where you tell us what kind of insurance policy you're looking for. Are you a homeowner who's looking to insure your home? Are you a renter who wants to insure your possessions? Do you live in a condo and you want to insure your unit? Or do you live in a mobile home? Because mobile home insurance is available through the CA too. And frankly, it's very inexpensive. If you live in a mobile home, I really encourage you to go to this website and see just how affordable a CA policy is. But regardless of the kind of home you're insuring, go to the website, click on get an estimate, get to this page, tell us what kind of policy you're looking for. And when you click on homeowner, as an example, we're going to follow this through. Go to the next slide, please. Let's say you clicked on that tab. That brings us to this page. We just need a little bit of information. Tell us what date it is that you're submitting this application on, or what date you'd like to begin that insurance policy, whether you're insured with a company that is insured to the California Earthquake Authority. We need to know where your home is located, and because the price of your insurance policy will depend on where you're situated. And then we're using an example here that's Oakland. We just took a zip code in Oakland, and we're going to run this example through. So go to the next slide, please. So let's say we're looking at a home in Oakland. It was built in 1929. So that's one of those vulnerable homes, the most vulnerable, really. This particular home has an insured value of $765,000. And note, that's not the market value. That's not how much they'd get if they put a for sale sign in front of their home. It's their insured value. It's what they insure that house for through their homeowner's policy. We take that value and match it exactly to the earthquake insurance policy. One story, raised foundation. This example says that it's a roof that's made out of composition material. And for this example, we're saying the homeowner's not done the retrofit yet. So they have to click no on that series of questions at the bottom that they have not done that work. Then they're ready to see what a premium would cost. And if you go to the next slide, a premium for this non-retrofitted 1929 home in Oakland would cost $3,400 a year, or $284 a month. And that's for a policy that would have a 15% deductible, meaning that 15% of the insured value would be deducted from the covered losses, and we'd pay out the difference. $5,000 worth of coverage for your contents, $1,500 of coverage for additional living expense coverage. You can move those sliders up and down to choose much more coverage if you want, although the higher the values of coverages you want, the premium will go up, or that's how you control the cost of your policy, by choosing how much coverage you're seeking. So here's sort of a standard policy, old home, not retrofitted, $3,400 a year in Oakland. And let's say that a person looks at that and says, well, that's more than I can afford. And then let's say the earthquake happens, and they're telling themselves, well, I wish I could turn back the clock, the hands of time, because I sure would have rather had that home retrofitted than have it slide off its foundation like the pictures Janelle just showed. But in this case, because this is an example and the earthquake hasn't struck yet, we can turn back the hands of time. So go to the next slide, and we're back to that part where we're telling the calculator whether it's retrofitted or not. So same example, same home. This time we're going to run it assuming that homeowner had taken the steps to invest that, what did Janelle say, $5,100 on average cost to retrofit the home. Retrofitted home now, hit the next slide, and we'll see that 25% discount brings the premium down to $2,500 a year. A 25% reduction because of that $5,100 of investment, that one-time investment that had been made in making the home safer, improving its value, and lowering the cost to insure it, all in one fell swoop. So if you go to the next slide, please. just to summarize, our little hypothetical home in Oakland, without retrofit, $3,400 a year. With retrofit, $2,500 a year, an annual savings of $852. So at $852, it doesn't take many years before of savings before you have that retrofit paid for. And in the meantime, you've had a home made much safer. That's not going to become a total loss when the ground starts shaking. So that's how the Janelle's retrofit program relates to the cost to insure the home. Whether you're fortunate enough to randomly be selected in the lottery that gets held when we're able to roll out a couple thousand more grants, or whether you just want to invest your own funds to make those improvements and therefore obtain much more affordable earthquake insurance. We've got a number of very happy folks who have taken those steps. These are some testimonials that you'll see if you go to our website, and you can hear from people themselves in terms of their experience and how pleased they are that they've gone ahead and taken this action. So sorry for the technical glitch, but that concludes my presentation. Happy to try to answer any questions.
Thanks, Glenn. Let's check the Q&A. Are there any questions?
Yes, we have a question from Diane. She says, we own our home in San Francisco, are on bedrock, and have a concrete foundation. It was built up to code in 1990. We don't currently have earthquake insurance. Do we absolutely have to have earthquake insurance, or are we secure enough? Is there anything else we need to do to secure our property?
Well, you're not going to see me tell anybody in California that they absolutely don't need earthquake insurance. California's earthquake country, obviously, and really nowhere is exempt from all risk. Some areas are less risky than others. Certainly, the Bay Area in general is tremendous seismic potential. The description of the area where this house lives sounds good in terms of bedrock and all of that. But in the end, it's just honestly, it's just a personal decision. No one needs to buy it. It's not mandated. It's not like you have a home in the floodplain. You got to have flood insurance in order to get a mortgage. It's not mandatory. One important thing to say is it is specifically excluded from the homeowner's policy for sure. In California, by law, there is no coverage for earthquake the shake damage as in the homeowner's policy. Specifically excluded. You need to buy a separate policy, and that's just entirely a personal choice.
Thank you. The next question is, HOAs currently aren't covered for recovery after a disaster. Are there any moves to include HOAs?
In earthquake insurance? I'm not sure that I understand the question is directed to.
I can jump in there, Glenn.
Yeah.
The California Earthquake Authority offers certain policies. Homeowners associations can buy commercial earthquake insurance because they would need a separate policy as well.
If the question relates to earthquake insurance for example, a condominium owner, the association itself, you're right, Janet, you're absolutely right, is not something you can purchase through the California Earthquake Authority. It's a commercial policy, but the unit owner themselves, if the property is classified as a condominium, can buy a policy for the walls in. I thought that there was a question about disaster assistance, though, embedded in that question, wasn't it?
No, it was a question about the HOA. But another question that we have regarding the HOA is, are there resources available to persuade neighbors and homeowners associations to seriously consider getting earthquake insurance?
Yeah, the best resources are the folks who live in that unit. I mean, talking to their friends and neighbors and talking about the need to get that entire property insured, because it's hard. It's a hard call for someone who lives in a unit if the whole complex doesn't have overall insurance for the common area. It's a difficult choice to make for a unit owner to purchase coverage just for their individual unit, knowing that the damage to the whole complex would not be covered. So that's really needs to be a local decision made by the folks who live there, and certainly a entire property that's covered with unit owners that have their own coverage is the best of all worlds.
A question from Roland. How is the retrofit certified for insurance discount?
Great question. And I'm going to throw that back to Janelle, who's worked really hard on this.
Yeah, absolutely. So we want to make sure when you retrofit through earthquake, brace, and bolt, we require a code compliant retrofit. It's not bringing your entire house up to code, but the retrofit is to a code. And we want the same kind of protections for our policyholders who are getting that discount. And so we have a form, a verification form, where you have a contractor, an engineer, or an architect, not an architect, but soon to be an architect, sign it stating that it with the retrofit is in conformance with, and we give a number of different standards for them to use. And then it won't be a certificate per se, but it will be a professional who's looked at it and said, yes, it is in conformance.
Thank you. Just a quick question. Why, Regina asks, why is earthquake insurance not included in home insurance policies?
Another good question. It used to be a long time ago, but back in the 70s and 80s, this was before my time at the CEA, but I understand there were some conflicts between individuals in terms of whether it was individuals insurance companies in terms of whether it covered earthquake insurance or not. So basically, courts got involved and rendered a decision that analyzing homeowner insurance policies, the courts concluded earthquake insurance is not a covered peril. So then the legislature, but it was still a little unclear. So the legislature got involved to make it crystal clear, passed a law that said it is specifically not covered in California. However, as sort of a quid pro quo, that same legislature said, but insurance companies must offer it when they sell the homeowner's policy. So the legislature said, we want to make it real clear to folks. So there's no confusion. It's not covered in your homeowner's policy. However, companies have to offer you the opportunity to buy a policy when they sell you that homeowner's policy. It's called the mandatory offer law. No other state in the union has such a thing. Earthquake insurance isn't covered in the homeowner's policy anywhere, but California is the only state that has this mandate that insurance companies offer a separate coverage when they buy their homeowner's policy. Most of those companies choose to do that by basically offering our policy. They become members of the CEA, and so State Farm, Farmers, Allstate, those companies are our participating insurance companies, as are many others. And when their agent sells a homeowner's policy, they must offer an earthquake insurance policy. And when they do that, they're offering a CEA policy.
Great, thank you, Glenn.
Thanks, Glenn. You answered a lot of great questions. Our next speaker is Randy Braverman. He does earthquake brace and bolt projects with safety-proof disaster preparedness.
Okay, we're here at this 100-year-old home. This home we're going live, so excuse my camera work. I'm going to do the best I can. So this is the home, and we're doing a retrofit. We're following a LA standard plan set for this home using our Simpson URFPs and the Simpson 835 anchors and the Titan bolts. Okay, and we're going over here now into the crawl space. The safety proof team is here installing we're talking about the cripple wall. We've already installed 2x4 blocking around the edges of plywood with 16D galvanized nails. We use 5-ply structural 1 plywood vented in each bay with 8D common nails. And now we're going to pre-drill a pilot hole for the 3-inch Samson lags screws. And we're going to sink the lag in. And now we've got the Simpson 4-inch by 1/2-inch concrete lag bolts, and we're going to drill that in. And as we blow the hole out to clear out any debris. And then we sink Simpson oil. So this is the cripple wall. Let me just figure out how to turn my camera around again. We'll be doing the cripple wall around 50% of this home.
Thanks, Randy. That was fantastic. It makes a huge difference seeing what that looks like underneath the home. Do we have any questions for Randy?
Are there any suggestions for a recommended design for bridge, driveway, stilted home as far as retrofit?
The recommendations for a tilted driveway?
Still, bridge, driveway, stilted home.
The only thing that you need to consider is whether or not the house has cripple walls. If I showed you, if they have any cripple wall that's over 4 feet, an engineer needs to come out and look at the job.
Hey, Janet, I have a quick question.
Answer your question?
Go ahead, Glenn.
Thank you. For Randy or Janelle. Janelle mentioned the average cost of a retrofit statewide, but Janelle, isn't it the case that retrofits just tend to be a lot more expensive in the Bay Area, Northern California, than in LA, and in the LA region? The cost.
Yes, it's absolutely true. Yeah. It's more expensive in the Bay Area because of cost of living, and the houses tend to be just a little more complicated. They tend to have more cripple walls and require more work. Oh, and on the stilted house, a true stilt house requires a structural engineering evaluation, assessment, and perhaps retrofit. So that's who I would recommend that you look for.
Great, thank you. One question from Sybil: what if you don't have a large crawl space?
We do retrofits in crawl spaces as high as 18 inches. I don't think we've had a situation where there's been less than that. If there is, it needs to at least be able to get a person underneath that home to do it. So when we come out and do the evaluation of the home, if there's not enough space, we will let the homeowner know.
Thanks so much. Okay, next up today is Tim Coucher. He is the engineering manager, Southwest US with Simpson Strong-Tie. Tim?
Yes, thank you, Janet. During the next few minutes, we will explore several different types of vulnerable buildings and types of retrofit solutions to reduce their risk. We've already kind of gone over a couple with Janelle and taken a look at that cripple wall solution, but we'll take a look at a couple different ones. Next slide, please. So Mother Nature is kind of our nemesis in a way. She likes to test our ability to maintain our way of life through throwing us curveballs every once in a while by either means of hurricanes, tornadoes, floods. But here in California, that curveball is earthquakes. As such, we have to find ways to make our buildings resist those forces from these events. And the most important of these types of ways to mitigate, in my opinion, is a lateral force system, lateral force resisting system, such as some shear walls, moment frames. It's the element that helps present or resist those side-to-side motions of earthquakes. Here we have a residential home, pre-1980, probably built in the 60s or 70s. And if we take a look at this picture, does anyone see any issues? So let's explore that. Along the single-story wall or single-story portion of the house, we have a lot of wall space in there. We've got a window and a door, but a lot of full-height walls. Now, the over-garage application, projecting from that single-story out to the actual garage front, again, we've got nothing but full-height walls. But if you take a look at the front garage area, adjacent to the garage door, on the left-hand side, we see a door, a person door, an entry door, which means that on this side of the building, the only area that helps resist that side-to-side motion is that small pier, small shear wall on the right-hand side. What do you think may have happened during an earthquake? Next slide, please. Well, the structure collapsed. And I'm sure that the homeowner wasn't looking for natural ventilation, nor were they looking at ways to reduce their exercise by removing the staircase to their upper level. But there are ways to mitigate this type of construction, and we'll take a look at one just right now. Next slide. One way to add strength in such buildings is adding shear walls. In this case, pre-manufactured walls. This one that you're looking here on the left-hand side is the WSW Woodstrong wall. It's manufactured by Simpson. Now, these are types of systems that could be inserted into new homes and to retrofitted older homes. And they arrive on the job site just as you see in that left-hand picture. In most common application for this type of product is to be used at the garage on either side of those garages. So it's strengthening that opening, allowing some resistance to that side-to-side movement of earthquakes. In a moment, we'll take a look at another vulnerable wood structure, but first, let's take a look at a common failure in concrete structures. Now, this is a picture of a failed concrete column, most commonly found in parking structures, in office buildings. Sometimes buildings are residential homes are manufactured from concrete, depending on where you live in the world. Now, this particular, if you can go back, please. The column vertical reinforcement there that's kind of buckled out didn't have enough reinforcement around the column, and it was really, really weak in earthquakes. And so retrofitting such structures is possible. Let's explore one of these solutions. Now, what we're seeing here is what we call fiber reinforced polymers. This is something that's typically engineered, so you're going to have to get an engineer to evaluate your structure. But ultimately, we're using fiber reinforced polymers, or FRP, in the sense of anchors, as you see in the upper right-hand picture, and fabrics. So basically, the anchor in the upper right-hand picture is a strong fiber that fans out at the ends. The FRP fabric, the lower right, is basically a bunch of those strands interwoven into a fabric, almost like a bed sheet. And you install these with an epoxy resin around the concrete column or a portion of the building, and over time that will cure and become hard, and it will strengthen your building. And so with help of these types of products, you can mitigate the types of concrete buildings that are very vulnerable to these types of earthquake failures. Again, pre-1980 type buildings. Let's take a look at this, what it looks like in real life. Next slide. So what you're seeing here is three different pictures of the same column at different stages of construction. On the left-hand side, you see contractors. They're applying the final wrap of the FRP fabric. And just below that, you can see the fanned edges of the anchors, the FRP anchors that actually go through the column. Now, the middle picture there is the final completed version of the wrap. And then what they end up doing is they go back in and they finish it so that it has a very similar appearance to what it was prior to the retrofit. Now let's take a step back and look at another vulnerable building type that is very, very common, what we call soft story or tuck under parking structures. So major earthquakes in the past few decades have shown certain residential buildings as susceptible to severe damage. The most vulnerable buildings are the tuck under parking buildings, built from the 1920s through the 1970s. And unfortunately, these structures were designed and built prior to those really outdated or too outdated seismic standards. In the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake, 6 of 7 4-story corner apartment buildings collapsed. And then during the 1994 earthquake, we had over 200 of these types of buildings that either suffered severe damage or collapse. Specifically, the one here on the right is one we'll talk about in a second. Next picture, please. So as you can see in these two pictures, these types of buildings have a very rigid upper portion, a lot of walls with windows in between. And the lower portion is usually on some type of post, but there's a lot of openings. And this creates a lot of issue from earthquakes. The side-to-side motion that has to be resisted is usually not done so on these types of buildings. Next slide, please. So in the image on the left, we see 3 full walls that extend the width of the building, 2 at each end and 1 in the middle. On the back end of the building, they have a full continuous wall as well. But on the side that we're looking at with all the parking, you will notice that there are no walls to help resist that side-to-side motion. This lack of first story, what we call strength and stiffness, will cause that building to rotate during an earthquake, as we will see in a real-life test here in a moment. That rotation you can see here in the upper right picture is what we call torsion in the industry. Next slide, please. So that rotation of that building leads to severe damage and many times collapse. On the right-hand side, you see 2 examples of collapsed apartment buildings after the Northridge earthquake. The one in the lower right, many people lost their lives, and this could have been avoided. So let's take a look at a test of a multi-story, soft-story building. Now, this was the inspiration for the test. It was a 1920 Victorian-style San Francisco corner apartment building, 3 floors above a parking garage at the first level. You can see that there's lots of parking garages at that first level. Next slide, please. So at the UC San Diego test facility, we modeled a building that looks just like this. You'll notice the arrow is in the direction of the shake table. It's only one direction. And we're actually videotaping it from the direction of the arrow. But you'll notice the lower right-hand picture there, the back sides of this building are fully sheathed. And then the 2 opposite corners that we're kind of facing right now have a lot of openings. So let's go ahead and run this test. Now you will notice that there's some steel structures on the sides of the building. This is just basically to protect the test facility building that you see over there on the left, as well as their other equipment. Like the pictures that we saw, that building rotated, what we call torsion, and ultimately collapsed. There wasn't enough strength at the first level. Next slide, please. There are ways to reduce and mitigate this as well. This is just one type of solution where you install moment frames along the length of that building where those garage parkings are. And you don't need them in every bay, but you definitely would need to comply with some type of program. The city of San Francisco, the city of LA all have mandatory retrofit programs. Those jurisdictions, smaller jurisdictions around those larger cities also are starting to implement these mandatory retrofit programs. So they're slightly different. Usually will require an engineer or an experienced contractor to get you through that process. Feel free to visit Simpson's YouTube channel. We have a lot more videos like this and others that you can take a look at.
Tim, thanks so much. That was excellent, really great information on buildings and how they can be so much safer. Do we have questions for Tim?
We have one quick question. What about apartments, rental houses, and multifamily homes? How can you make structural changes to a building that you don't own?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think as we have seen in the larger cities, like the city of LA, down here in Southern California, a lot of the jurisdictions surrounding that, Beverly Hills has now implemented a retrofit program. Santa Monica, a lot of other jurisdictions are looking at that because this type of structure makes up a lot of our residential homes. And they are a mandatory retrofit program. They're going to have to go through this process. But if you are a building owner and you own these types of building, it's always very important to take a look at how you might retrofit this and preserve your investment.
One other quick question. What magnitude did you use for your test building?
I believe that was the Northridge earthquake record, which was a magnitude 6.7.
Thank you.
Wow, that was great. Thanks again, Tim. Thanks everyone for all the great questions. Right now, I'm going to share some final information about some additional earthquake insurance options you might want to consider. So we've talked quite a bit about preparing financially. We've talked about earthquake insurance. It's not mandatory in the US, but earthquakes in the US are not covered under standard homeowners or business insurance policies. So again, I just want to make sure that you're clear. Coverage is available either in the form of an endorsement, which sometimes we call a rider to your homeowner's policy, or as a separate policy for homeowners, renters, condo owners, and business owners, small business, but also large commercial. To get more insights and to find out whether earthquake insurance is available in your area, you can contact your insurance professional, whoever you have your other insurance with, or you can also contact your state Department of Insurance. Let's look at what business owners should consider on the next slide. Do I need earthquake insurance for my business? Well, I think from Tim and all the other things we've seen today, the answer is yes, you should consider it. And you need to look at things. Your business earthquake policy will generally cover. It will cover damage to your building, to your business property, such as your inventory. Depending on the policy, you could also have lost business income caused by the earthquake covered. So coverage begins when damage has exceeded your policy's deductible. Think about the deductible that you're going to take and how you would pay for that deductible before you got your insurance coverage. Always important consideration. The amount you pay out of pocket before your insurance kicks in is the deductible. Earthquake insurance policies often have high deductibles ranging from 2% to as high as 20% of the value of your building, depending on its location, its age, and its condition. Are there special requirements for qualifying for earthquake insurance? Your business property may have to undergo an inspection and upgrades before you can qualify for earthquake insurance. For instance, before your building can be insured, you may have to have the structure bolted to its foundation, and we talked extensively about that today. And you may have to brace your chimneys, walls, or make other improvements. You can check on www.iii.org for earthquake facts and statistics as well. We have a lot of information on how much previous earthquakes cost insurance companies, the losses that were incurred on our website, iii.org. So thanks so much for taking time today. Let's go to the next slide. In a moment, we're going to continue taking additional questions. And actually, some of us will remain for a bit longer to make sure your questions can be answered. But first, I just want to make sure everyone knows about our next webinar on September 30th for Step 5, which is going to be all about how to protect yourself during earthquakes. It's actually shaking. What do you do? In many locations and situations, including for people with disabilities. Registration is already open now at earthquakecountry.org/safer-at-home. This is also where the recording from today's webinar will be available sometime next week. So again, if you have time, stay on the line and we'll have time for more Q&A with some of our really great experts that you've heard from today. But thank you so much for being a part of this today. We certainly hope we helped you with some of your questions and gave you some great information that you can use.
Janet, we do have a question from Candy. If we have earthquake insurance via the CEA as offered by my homeowner's policy, is it possible that a separate condo policy from a private company would be less expensive, or is CEA the least?
Usually you go through the insurance carrier that you have your regular fire insurance with. So I would assume yours is part of the California Earthquake Authority. That's generally what most people do, but of course you can shop and compare and check some of the private insurance companies that offer earthquake insurance. Get a quote and see what it compares.
Are there recommendations for commercial property insurance companies for consideration by a homeowners association to cover the entire structure for the building, like a condo building?
Oh, that's a great question. Usually, again, you're going to look at who you have your regular condo association insurance with and ask them for a quote. But you can also, again, check with other companies that sell commercial insurance. Every insurer in the state of California is required to offer it. And so they will all be able to give you a quote on what it would cost for your particular condo association.
What's the advantage of getting insurance with CEA versus other insurance providers?
The CEA really came in and did a lot of work. And since they provide so much insurance for the state of California, they have done, great programs like we heard today with the brace and bolt, et cetera. So the advantage is that you would have your homeowner's fire insurance and earthquake insurance with the same carrier. If you don't have your insurance with a carrier that offers CEA, then you can also get insurance either through them or through some of the specialized carriers that offer earthquake insurance only. A quick Google search will usually bring them all up. And there are also some carriers that will advertise online, on TV, etc., for earthquake insurance. Again, it's always a good thing to shop and compare for all your insurance needs and find what really meets your needs particularly.
If we get earthquake coverage, does this deduct from our homeowner's coverage, personal property, auto, etc.?
Can you ask that again?
Steve asks, if we get earthquake coverage, does this deduct from our homeowner's coverage?
I'm not sure what Steve means by deduct.
He asks, does this deduct from our homeowner's coverage, personal property, auto, etc.?
I don't believe it does. It would be additional.
Yeah, I think I was trying to figure out that question too. This is Janelle, and I think it means, I don't think there's any overlap in coverage. For example, your homeowner's policy will pay for fire following earthquake, earthquake pays for earthquake damage. Your policy that you have your car insured with will cover your car. So in the rare instance where you have an insurance company that has all of those policies, I don't know if they do any bundling. The CEA is a separate policy, so there wouldn't be, well, actually there might be a CEA participating insurer that gives you a discount on the homeowners if you have earthquake insurance. So as Janet said, you just need to make sure you check.
Yeah, and that, when you have a question like that with your particular insurance company, the best thing you can do is speak with your insurance agent or the company directly to ask a question like that. But as we spoke earlier, each policy is separate in California. In other states, some of them are endorsements, and so that question might have a little more merit in other states. But in California, they are very separate policies. And thanks to the staff at ECA and SCEC for hosting this fantastic webinar series. It's so helpful. We really appreciate all your work.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.